The easiest mistake a powerful man can make is believing exhaustion looks the same as laziness. My name is Emily Carter, and the morning Adrian Moretti fired me for falling asleep at my desk, I didn't have the strength to lift my head, let alone defend myself. The fluorescent lights above the cybersecurity operations center had blurred into pale white streaks hours ago. Every monitor around me pulsed with dashboards, threat alerts, and endless streams of encrypted traffic that my eyes could barely focus on anymore. The stale smell of burnt coffee clung to the room like a second skin, mixing with the quiet hum of cooling fans hidden beneath rows of expensive workstations. Somewhere in the distance, someone laughed about weekend plans. I couldn't remember what day it was. I only remembered the clock reading 8:17 a.m. before my vision finally surrendered to darkness for what couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Then came the sound that snapped everyone back to attention. Expensive Italian leather shoes striking polished concrete with calm, measured confidence. Nobody needed to look up to know who had entered. Adrian Moretti never announced himself. The silence always did it for him. CEO of Moretti Global Security. Billionaire. Business icon. A man whose reputation for impossible standards traveled faster than any press release. Employees straightened in their chairs without thinking. Conversations disappeared. Even keyboards seemed quieter. I felt the room change before I felt his shadow. My cheek was still resting against folded arms when a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Miss Carter." My eyes opened too slowly. The world swam before settling into focus. Black tailored suit. Silver tie. Steel blue eyes that never seemed to blink long enough to miss anything. Adrian Moretti stood beside my workstation, looking down at me as though disappointment had become a physical object. My mouth went dry. I tried to stand too quickly, nearly knocking over the empty coffee cups scattered beside my keyboard. 3 paper cups. 2 unopened protein bars. A hoodie draped over the back of my chair. The evidence looked terrible. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice rough from dehydration. "Save it," he replied, calm enough to make it hurt even more. "People trust this company with their lives, their businesses, and their private data. If you can't stay awake during business hours, you're working in the wrong place." Every pair of eyes in the operations center drifted toward us before immediately pretending they weren't watching. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My heartbeat pounded louder than the servers surrounding us. I wanted to explain why my body refused to cooperate. I wanted to tell him that I hadn't seen my apartment in 2 days. That my last real meal came from a vending machine. That every muscle in my body felt like wet concrete. But the words never came. Excuses sounded small standing in front of someone who built an empire on discipline. Adrian's expression never changed. "Collect your things. Human resources will process your termination immediately." The sentence landed with terrifying simplicity. No argument. No warning. No second chance. Just over. I swallowed hard and nodded once. Understood. It was the only word I trusted myself to say. I reached for the small cardboard box beneath my desk, unaware that somewhere deep inside Moretti Global, something far more dangerous than my career was quietly waiting for me to walk out the front door. The cardboard box felt strangely light as I carried it across the operations floor. A framed photo of my parents. A worn blue hoodie that had become my blanket sometime during the night. A notebook filled with passwords that no longer mattered because they had all been replaced by memory months ago. 3 unopened packets of instant oatmeal. My security badge rested on top like a tiny piece of plastic that suddenly erased 4 years of my life. Nobody looked directly at me. Some pretended to study their monitors while others suddenly became fascinated by coffee machines that had not moved in years. I could feel sympathy hanging in the air, but sympathy was quiet. Nobody wanted to challenge Adrian Moretti's decision. Nobody ever did. Human Resources occupied the corner office overlooking the Chicago skyline. On most mornings the view was breathtaking. Today the glass reflected nothing except the tired woman standing in front of it. Denise from Human Resources offered me a sad smile as she slid paperwork across the desk. She had always remembered birthdays. She always kept chocolate in her drawer for stressful days. This morning she looked like she wanted to apologize for something she could not control. "I'm sorry, Emily," she said softly. "I wish this meeting were under different circumstances." I nodded without answering. Speaking required energy I no longer had. I signed every document she placed in front of me. Termination acknowledgement. Benefits information. Final paycheck authorization. My signature became sloppier with every page until it barely resembled my own handwriting. Denise hesitated before collecting the papers. "Would you like to explain what happened this morning? Mr. Moretti usually—" She stopped herself. "Usually what? Changed his mind? Offered second chances?" Neither sounded believable. I forced the smallest smile I could manage. "No. He made the decision he thought was right." Even saying those words made my chest tighten. Because if I had walked into that room and found an employee asleep during a critical shift, I probably would have reached the same conclusion. That realization hurt more than losing my job. My phone buzzed as I stepped into the elevator. 6 missed calls from my younger brother, Noah. 2 messages from my landlord asking about rent. 1 automated reminder that my student loan payment was due in 3 days. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without opening anything. The elevator doors opened into the bright marble lobby where employees hurried toward another ordinary workday. Nobody noticed the woman carrying a cardboard box toward the revolving doors. Outside, the crisp October air hit my face like cold water. The city was already alive with taxi horns, buses, and hurried footsteps. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, unsure where to go. Home sounded wonderful, but I was not even certain I could stay awake long enough to drive there safely. Across the street, a small coffee shop had just unlocked its doors. I walked inside, ordered the cheapest black coffee on the menu, and sat near the window overlooking Moretti Global's headquarters. Steam curled gently from the paper cup between my trembling hands. For the first time in 48 hours, there was nothing demanding my attention. No flashing alerts. No encrypted traffic. No countdown clock hidden inside lines of malicious code. The silence should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt wrong. My instincts refused to relax. Somewhere beneath that glass tower, hidden inside millions of lines of digital activity, something unfinished was still moving. And if I was right, firing me had not ended the crisis. It had only removed the one person who knew where to look. The first alert reached the Security Operations Center exactly 17 minutes after I walked out of the building. I did not know that at the time. I was still staring through the coffee shop window, watching employees stream into Moretti Global, while autumn leaves skated across the sidewalk like tiny pieces of gold. My hands finally stopped shaking enough to hold the paper cup without spilling it. I should have felt relieved. Instead, every instinct I had developed over years of chasing invisible threats refused to let go. 48 hours earlier, that same operations center had looked nothing like the calm office everyone knew. The lights had stayed on all night. Half the desks had emptied as one shift handed responsibility to the next, but I never left. At first it had looked ordinary. A few failed login attempts. Unusual network traffic. Background noise that most analysts ignored because thousands of harmless anomalies happened every day. But something about the pattern bothered me. The requests arrived too perfectly spaced apart. Too patient. Too intelligent. Whoever sat behind those attacks was not trying to break through the front door. They were studying the locks. I remember opening another can of sparkling water because coffee had stopped working hours earlier. My eyes burned every time I blinked, but every new log file confirmed the same uneasy feeling growing inside me. This was not random. Someone was mapping the entire infrastructure one silent step at a time. I sent an internal report before sunrise, marking it as high priority. The automated system confirmed delivery within seconds. Nobody responded. Executive meetings filled calendars. Department managers focused on quarterly reports. The warning disappeared beneath dozens of ordinary emails. So I stayed. If no one else was going to watch the network, I would. By the second night, my hoodie had become a blanket across my shoulders. The vending machine outside the operations center no longer accepted my credit card because I had used it so many times that weekend. I laughed at the machine when it rejected another payment. The sound startled even me because I could not remember the last conversation I had with another human being. Every screen surrounding my workstation displayed a different piece of the puzzle. One monitor tracked login activity. Another visualized encrypted traffic flowing between continents. A third highlighted tiny changes buried inside millions of lines of system activity. Most people saw meaningless numbers. I saw fingerprints. Every attacker leaves habits behind. Some rush. Some hesitate. Some grow careless after early success. This one never made the same move twice. That frightened me more than anything. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, the pattern suddenly changed. Thousands of harmless requests stopped at once. Complete silence. My pulse quickened. Silence inside a network almost never meant safety. It usually meant someone had already slipped inside and no longer needed to knock. I leaned closer to the monitor, ignoring the stiffness in my neck. Hidden beneath ordinary system traffic, a tiny unauthorized process appeared for less than 4 seconds before disappearing again. 4 seconds were enough. I copied the signature, isolated the connection, and began building emergency filters by hand. Nobody asked me to. Nobody even knew I was still there. Outside the operations center windows, dawn slowly painted the Chicago skyline in soft shades of orange and blue. Inside, I whispered one sentence to myself that nobody else would hear. Please let me be wrong. But somewhere deep inside Moretti Global servers, the invisible intruder had already made its next move. My phone vibrated just as I finished the last sip of coffee. The screen lit up with Noah's name again. This time I answered before it could ring twice. "Emily, are you all right?" he asked, his voice carrying the kind of worry only family could hear through silence. I closed my eyes for a moment. "I lost my job." There was a pause. "What happened?" I looked across the street at the glass tower reflecting the morning sun. "I fell asleep at my desk." Saying the words out loud sounded almost ridiculous after everything that had happened. Noah did not respond immediately. He knew me too well. "You never fall asleep at work," he finally said. "Not unless something is seriously wrong." I smiled despite myself. "I am just tired." It was easier than explaining 48 hours of invisible panic. Easier than describing how every blinking cursor had felt like a ticking clock. Easier than admitting that I still believed the real danger had not even started. We hung up after a few minutes, and I promised I would come home and sleep. I meant it when I said it. I truly believed I could finally rest. Then another vibration interrupted my thoughts. This time it was not family. It was a former teammate named Kevin. His message contained only 4 words. "Something is happening. Call." Before I could respond, another message arrived. Then another. The operations center was experiencing unusual system slowdowns. Internal communication servers had become unstable. Employees were reporting that shared files were disappearing and reappearing seconds later. Nothing catastrophic. Not yet. But I knew those symptoms. They were not random failures. They were stress fractures. Tiny cracks spreading beneath a building that still looked perfectly stable from the outside. I immediately called Kevin. He answered before the first ring finished. The noise behind his voice sounded nothing like the calm office I had left less than an hour earlier. Keyboards clicked rapidly. Phones rang without stopping. Someone shouted for another log report. "Emily," Kevin said, breathing hard. "The network is acting strange. We cannot isolate the source." My pulse climbed instantly. "Did the unauthorized process return?" Silence. "How did you know?" "Because I never removed it completely," I thought. "I only trapped it long enough to buy time. Time that disappeared the moment I walked out carrying a cardboard box." "Listen carefully," I said, standing so quickly that my chair scraped against the coffee shop floor. Check every outbound authentication request created within the last 12 hours. Ignore the obvious alerts. Look for the quiet ones. I could almost hear him typing. Several seconds passed. Then his breathing changed. Emily. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. There are thousands of them. Outside, traffic continued flowing through downtown Chicago as if nothing had changed. Office workers carried breakfast sandwiches. Delivery trucks unloaded packages. Joggers crossed the intersection beneath bright autumn sunlight. The entire city looked perfectly ordinary. Only a handful of people inside Moretti Global understood that something invisible was unfolding beneath layers of encrypted code. Kevin spoke again, louder this time. Wait. Someone is calling an executive meeting. I already knew who that someone would be. Adrian Moretti did not panic. He gathered information first. He trusted systems, reports, and facts. The one fact he did not have anymore was sitting across the street with a paper coffee cup in one hand and a terminated employee badge in the other. As I watched the revolving doors spin without me, one impossible thought settled heavily into my mind. The company had just locked its only locksmith outside while every digital door inside was beginning to unlock itself. Inside the executive conference room, nobody noticed the city anymore. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed one of the most beautiful skylines in America, but every pair of eyes remained fixed on the wall of monitors displaying live security dashboards. Adrian Moretti stood at the head of the long walnut table with both hands resting against its polished surface. He had built companies by staying calm while everyone else lost theirs. Today, however, the silence surrounding him felt different. It was heavier. More dangerous. Report, he said. The chief technology officer cleared his throat before speaking. We have isolated hundreds of suspicious authentication requests. Kevin shook his head from the opposite side of the table. Not hundreds. Thousands. They are multiplying faster than our filters can classify them. Another analyst projected a timeline across the largest display. Green indicators that represented healthy systems slowly shifted toward yellow. Nothing had turned red yet, but everyone in the room understood what the colors meant. They were watching stability disappear in real time. Adrian studied the screen without blinking. What changed this morning? Nobody answered immediately. Then Kevin swallowed hard. Emily Carter left the building. The room fell silent again. Adrian looked toward him. Explain. Kevin hesitated, choosing every word carefully. She was monitoring unusual activity for the past 2 days. Adrian's expression remained unreadable. Why was I not informed? The chief technology officer adjusted his glasses. A preliminary report was submitted, but it was classified as needing additional review before executive escalation. Adrian slowly turned toward the monitor displaying the original ticket. The timestamp appeared on the screen. 46 hours earlier. Attached below it were dozens of updates. New findings. Additional warnings. Handwritten comments. Every single one came from the same employee. Emily Carter. He continued reading in complete silence. The room could hear nothing except keyboards and air conditioning. Finally, Adrian spoke. Open the building access logs. Another analyst complied. Emily had entered the office just after 6 o'clock 2 mornings earlier. There was no recorded exit. Security camera footage appeared beside the log. Adrian watched without saying a word. Emily remained at her workstation through sunrise. Through afternoon meetings. Through another night. She disappeared only twice, once for less than 4 minutes to refill a water bottle and once to visit the vending machine. The footage returned to her desk each time. The empty coffee cups multiplied. Her posture grew slower. She rubbed her eyes, stretched stiff shoulders, wrapped a hoodie around herself, and continued typing while the office around her changed shifts again and again. Adrian watched another clip. 3:30 in the morning. Most of the floor sat empty. Emily leaned forward, staring at 6 monitors at once before suddenly reaching for another keyboard. Her hands moved rapidly as warning windows flashed across the screens. Nobody else appeared beside her. Nobody checked on her. Nobody told her to go home. The final recording played only minutes before Adrian entered the operations center that morning. Emily rested her forehead against folded arms. She did not collapse dramatically. She simply stopped moving after nearly 2 full days of remaining awake. 8 minutes later he arrived. Nobody in the conference room dared interrupt the recording as it replayed the moment she struggled to stand before quietly accepting her dismissal. Adrian reached for the remote and paused the video on a single frame. Emily's exhausted face filled the display. Beside her sat 3 empty coffee cups, unopened food, and pages of handwritten notes covering the desk. His eyes shifted toward the digital activity chart beside the image. The first major wave of suspicious network behavior had begun exactly 17 minutes after she walked out of the building. Adrian spoke so quietly that everyone leaned forward to hear him. "Bring me every report she wrote. Every message she sent. Every line she touched. Right now." The reports arrived in Adrian Moretti's office stacked inside a thick binder that should never have existed. Hundreds of pages. Timestamps. Network diagrams. Handwritten observations squeezed into narrow margins between printed logs. He opened the first page expecting routine technical notes. Instead, he found a timeline so detailed it read like the diary of someone fighting a battle nobody else could see. Every unusual connection had been documented. Every failed attempt had been cross-referenced. Every recommendation had been updated as new evidence appeared. Emily Carter had not simply watched the network. She had studied it hour after hour until she understood how the invisible intruder was thinking. Adrian continued turning pages in complete silence. The handwriting became slightly less steady as the hours passed. Coffee stains appeared near the bottom corners. One page contained a note written at 4:23 in the morning. Pattern changed. They are testing human response time now. Another entry 6 hours later read, "Temporary filters holding. Need executive authorization for deeper isolation." There was no signature approving the request. The following page simply said, "Continuing anyway. Time matters more than procedure." Adrian looked up from the binder toward the wall of windows overlooking downtown Chicago. For the first time that morning, the city seemed unusually distant. He remembered the exhausted woman standing in front of him with unfocused eyes and trembling hands. He had seen someone sleeping on the job. He had completely missed someone refusing to abandon her responsibility. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Kevin entered carrying a portable drive. "We recovered the rest of her workstation data." Adrian motioned for him to continue. "There is something else you should see." Seconds later, Emily's workstation appeared on the large display inside Adrian's office exactly as she had left it. 6 monitors. Emergency scripts still open. Threat maps covering multiple countries. Draft emails requesting immediate escalation. Unsaved notes filled one side of the screen. One sentence caught Adrian's attention immediately. "If I lose access before this is finished, someone must keep watching Node 7. Adrian frowned. "What is Node 7? Kevin typed rapidly before another network map appeared. A tiny section of the company's global infrastructure flashed yellow. "That is where today's activity started." Neither man spoke for several long seconds. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Adrian walked closer to the screen until he could see every detail. Emily had identified the exact location of the weakness nearly a full day before the first widespread system disruptions began. She had predicted the sequence with unsettling accuracy. Another analyst rushed into the office without knocking. "Sir, the containment filters are failing faster than expected." Adrian turned immediately. "Can we rebuild what Emily created?" The analyst lowered his eyes. "We are trying. She customized everything manually. We understand pieces of it, but not the entire design." Adrian nodded once, though disappointment settled heavily across his face. He had spent years believing that every position inside his company could eventually be replaced by another capable professional. Today that belief was collapsing one fact at a time. Outside his office, employees moved quickly between departments carrying laptops and printed reports. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was panicking. Professionals did their jobs with remarkable discipline. Yet Adrian could feel uncertainty spreading quietly through the building. It reminded him of the first tiny crack appearing in thick ice before anyone realized the entire surface was beginning to give way. He closed the binder carefully instead of slamming it shut. His reflection stared back at him from the dark conference room window. For the first time in many years, he did not question his employees. He questioned his own judgment. Then he looked toward Kevin and spoke with calm certainty. Find Emily Carter before this company loses something far more valuable than its network. I did not make it home. By the time I reached my apartment building, exhaustion had settled into my bones so deeply that even climbing 3 flights of stairs felt like hiking a mountain with wet cement tied to my shoes. My keys slipped from my fingers twice before I finally unlocked the door. The apartment greeted me with complete silence. A small couch. A second-hand bookshelf. Bills stacked neatly beside my laptop. Everything looked exactly as I had left it 2 days earlier, yet somehow it already felt like a different life. I dropped the cardboard box beside the couch and collapsed without even taking off my shoes. The room blurred almost instantly. I remember setting an alarm because part of me still believed I needed to wake up and monitor the network. Old habits refused to disappear. I closed my eyes for what I thought would be 10 minutes. The sharp vibration of my phone dragged me back into consciousness. I reached for it without opening my eyes. 23. Missed calls. 15 text messages. 4 voicemails. Every notification came from Moretti Global. My heart skipped once before settling into an uneasy rhythm. The newest message came from Kevin. Emily, please answer. We need you. Another followed less than a minute later. It is getting worse. I sat upright so quickly that the room spun around me. My laptop was still inside my backpack. Within seconds it rested on my coffee table as familiar startup sounds filled the apartment. I knew I no longer worked for the company. I also knew that did not stop me from caring whether thousands of innocent employees would wake up tomorrow with jobs waiting for them. Before I could finish logging into my personal system, another notification appeared. This one came from an unfamiliar number. This is Adrian Moretti. I owe you a conversation. I stared at the screen longer than I wanted to admit. The message was brief. Professional. No explanations. No demands. Just one sentence followed by another. Please answer when you are able. I placed the phone face down without replying. Respect could not be restored through a text message. My attention shifted back to the laptop. Public network monitoring tools showed unusual traffic patterns spreading far beyond Moretti Global's internal systems. Whatever had begun inside the company was now reaching connected partners one cautious step at a time. They were moving carefully. Patiently. Exactly as I remembered. My stomach tightened. Then something caught my eye. A familiar digital signature appeared buried inside publicly visible traffic. The same signature I had isolated nearly 2 days earlier. They were back, but this time they were using a different path. I opened my notebook from the cardboard box and flipped rapidly through handwritten pages until I found an unfinished diagram labeled Node 7. My pencil marks suddenly made perfect sense. I had been watching the front entrance while they quietly built another doorway somewhere else. The realization sent a chill across my arms despite the warm apartment. Another knock echoed through the room. Not loud. Not impatient. Just 3 calm, deliberate knocks against the front door. I froze. Almost nobody knew where I lived. Noah always called first. Delivery drivers buzzed downstairs. I walked carefully toward the peephole, expecting a neighbor or another package. Instead, I saw a man standing alone in a perfectly tailored black suit, his hands visible at his sides, his posture calm, his expression carrying none of the authority I had seen that morning. Adrian Moretti had come without an entourage, without security, and without the confidence of a man expecting the door to open. For several seconds neither of us moved. The hallway outside my apartment was quiet except for the faint buzz of an aging light fixture overhead. Adrian Moretti waited with the patience of someone who understood that knocking on a door did not mean earning the right to walk through it. I kept one hand on the lock while studying him through the peephole. The man standing there looked nothing like the executive who had dismissed me only hours earlier. His jacket remained perfectly tailored, but his tie had been loosened. The confidence that usually surrounded him like armor had softened into something far more human. I opened the door only a few inches. "You found my address," I said quietly. "Human Resources had it on file," he answered. "I would not have come if it were not important." I almost laughed. Everything was important this morning, too. He lowered his eyes for the briefest moment before meeting mine again. "You are right." That answer caught me off guard. I had expected explanations. Maybe excuses? Instead, he offered neither. "May I have 5 minutes?" he asked. I hesitated before stepping aside just enough for him to enter. My apartment suddenly felt even smaller with someone accustomed to glass towers and executive boardrooms standing beside my worn couch. His attention drifted across the room without judgment. The second-hand furniture. The stack of technical books beside my laptop. The unopened bills on the kitchen counter. The cardboard box holding everything I had carried out of Moretti Global that morning. Finally his eyes settled on the notebook spread open across the coffee table. The page labeled Node 7 remained covered with handwritten arrows and annotations. "You were still working," he said almost to himself. "I never stopped thinking," I replied. Silence settled between us again. Adrian slowly removed a flash drive from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table without pushing it toward me. "Everything you predicted is happening." I looked at the drive but made no effort to touch it. "I know." His eyebrows lifted slightly. I turned my laptop so he could see the monitoring dashboard I had been using. Public traffic data flowed across the screen. Connection maps. Authentication requests. Unusual routing changes. His expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "You have been watching from here. People still depend on those systems," I answered. "Whether I work there or not does not change that." Adrian exhaled slowly before speaking again. "Emily, I misjudged you." There was no hesitation in his voice. No attempt to soften the words. "I saw someone asleep instead of someone who had stayed awake for everyone else." I folded my arms, not out of anger but because I suddenly felt exhausted all over again. "You made a decision with the information you had." He shook his head once. "No. I made a decision before I gathered all the information I should have." The distinction mattered. I could hear that he understood it. He looked toward the notebook again. "My team rebuilt part of your work. They cannot rebuild all of it." I remained silent. "They need the person who created it." Another pause filled the room. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the apartment windows, replacing the afternoon sunlight with gray reflections across the floor. Adrian did not step closer. He did not pressure me. He simply stood there with the humility of someone asking instead of ordering for the first time in a very long while. "I am not here to demand your return," he said quietly. "I am here because thousands of employees, clients, and families trust us to protect what matters to them. I cannot ask them to carry the cost of my mistake." I looked at the flash drive resting untouched on my coffee table, then back at the man who had finally learned that authority could open doors, but only respect could invite someone back through them. I looked at the flash drive for a long moment before finally picking it up. It felt surprisingly ordinary for something carrying so much responsibility. I plugged it into my laptop, and within seconds the files opened across the screen. The attack had evolved exactly as I feared. The original intrusion had never been about overwhelming the network. It had been about earning trust one tiny step at a time until the system stopped questioning unfamiliar behavior. Fortunately, whoever designed it still followed patterns, and patterns always left clues. I reached for my notebook and began writing fresh instructions beside the diagrams I had drawn the night before. Adrian remained completely silent, allowing me to think without interruption. Every few minutes I asked a short question about the company's current configuration. Every answer confirmed the same conclusion. There was still enough time. Barely. "Call Kevin," I said. Adrian immediately took out his phone. Within moments the operations center appeared through a secure video connection. Familiar faces filled the screen. They looked exhausted, worried, and then suddenly relieved when they saw me sitting at my apartment table. Nobody celebrated. Nobody wasted time. I walked them through every adjustment, one careful step at a time. Isolate the authentication chain. Redirect internal verification. Rebuild the trust certificates manually instead of automatically. Watch Node 7, but do not ignore the secondary route connected to it. The room on the other end became quiet except for steady keyboard clicks. Minutes passed. Then one dashboard after another slowly changed. Yellow indicators returned to green. Suspicious traffic began dropping instead of multiplying. Authentication failures stabilized. Kevin looked toward his monitor before smiling for the first time that day. "It is working." I released a breath I had not realized I was holding. The apartment suddenly felt lighter. Adrian thanked every member of the team before ending the call. He turned toward me with genuine gratitude, but before he could speak, I raised one hand gently. "Before you say anything, there is something I need you to understand." He nodded. "Go ahead." I looked toward the rain sliding down my apartment window. I did not help because I wanted my job back. I helped because thousands of honest people should never pay for a mistake that was not theirs. Adrian listened without interrupting. "Technology can always be repaired," I continued. "Trust is much harder to rebuild." He stood quietly for several seconds before answering. "Then let me begin rebuilding it." The following Monday, every employee at Moretti Global received an invitation to an all-hands meeting. Nobody expected Adrian Moretti to step onto the stage without notes in his hands. He spoke clearly enough for every corner of the room to hear. He explained that leadership required accountability, not perfection. He admitted that he had reached a conclusion before seeking the complete truth. Then, in front of the entire company, he apologized to me by name. The room remained silent until he finished. I walked onto the stage because hiding would have made the moment about pride instead of purpose. Adrian offered me my position back along with a promotion to lead the company's threat intelligence division. I accepted only after making one request. Build a culture where people ask one more question before making one more judgment. Adrian smiled and nodded. Done. Months later, people often asked how Moretti Global had become stronger after one of the most challenging weeks in its history. They expected me to talk about cybersecurity, technology, or strategy. Instead, I always gave the same answer. The strongest firewall any company will ever build is not made of code. It is built when people choose curiosity over assumptions, respect over authority, and truth over first impressions. After all, power may open doors, but character is what determines who is welcome back inside.